Melania Trump made a sly comment on a hot mic, but Jasmine Crockett's quick response didn't just quiet the room. It started a national reckoning. This wasn't just another political fundraiser. It was the start of a moment that would get everyone in the room, and then the whole country, talking. The Omni's Grand Ballroom in downtown Dallas has an amazing atmosphere. The hall smelled like roses and old money, and glittering lights shone on every polished surface. Tuxedos brushed against beautiful gowns, and shoes clicked on the marble with quiet authority. It wasn't just a way to raise money. It was political theater in the guise of a party. The throng, which included party insiders, megachurch pastors, oil heirs, and state politicians, drank champagne and looked around the room for the next piece of rumor. And as the night went on, Melania Trump would be the most important person. She was still the First Lady and still got the kind of attention that came from what she didn't say, not what she did. She was there on purpose. She didn't show up like this very often, certainly not by herself, but tonight she did sans the former president. She wore a sharply fitted white suit with gold buttons, and her face was cold and unreadable. She moved from one group to another, never staying in one place for very long. When she spoke, it was short and to the point. The cameras made sure to catch every move she made. But shortly, the mood in the room was going to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The mood in the room altered around 20 minutes after Melania got there. A staff member whispered something to someone at a table close to the stage, and phones started ringing as people turned their heads toward the double doors on the side of the ballroom. Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman, had just come in. The difference couldn't have been clearer. Jasmine Crockett was wearing a two-piece power suit that was burnt orange, with fancy embroidery on the cuffs and lapels. This was obviously a tribute to her Texas origins. Her hair was up, her earrings were big, and her heels made a lot of noise on the marble floor. She wasn't trying to fit in, and she wasn't doing it. Some people clapped, some stared, and one woman with pearls muttered something to her husband that made him smile. Jasmine saw it, but she didn't move. She strolled up to the check-in station with confidence, greeted the volunteers by name, and took her speaker's envelope like someone who knew how to run a room. As the event started to come together backstage, a brief conversation between Melania and a donor would transform the trajectory of the night. After the donor praised Melania's dress, someone, maybe a board member, humorously remarked out Crockett's bright clothes. Melania didn't laugh. She tilted her head a little, smiled just enough, and remarked, "Some people dress for the cameras, not the country." There was a short silence, but it wasn't awkward. Someone close to Melania laughed, not sure what to do. Melania took a sip of her water and went on. But that offhand comment had gotten through, and someone, maybe a junior staffer or a tech crew member, still had their mic feed live. In a matter of minutes, murmurs started to spread like static through the rear of the ballroom. Two AV techs were in the control room listening to the audio stream when they heard the comment and stopped. They understood this wasn't simply a casual comment. It was planned, well thought out, and had just the perfect amount of ice in the tone. Before commencing to clip the audio, one tech looked at the other. "Did you hear that?" he asked. The second tech nodded and moved the file right away to a confidential folder on his laptop. They couldn't just ignore this. People instantly shared the recording, and within seconds, Jasmine's aide Alicia was getting the footage by text. The message said, "Alicia, you need to hear this." Alicia, who was standing near the table with snacks, listened for a second before turning away to think about how serious the situation was. She knew Jasmine needed to hear that before she went on stage. Jasmine was sitting in the green room, taking off her heels, going over her speech notes, and eating almonds. Alicia came in and held out her phone. "Just listen," she urged. Jasmine leaned in and listened carefully, then reclined back in her chair. Even though her brow furrowed slightly, her face stayed calm. "Well," she remarked with a slight breath, "isn't that something?" Alicia waited for a sign, but Jasmine shook her head. "No, I got it." She put her heels back on, tucked her notes under her arm, and made a small adjustment to her jacket. "I'm not going to get loud," she continued, "but I am going to be clear." With that, she was ready to face the ballroom. At the same time, the mood in the room was changing. One reporter had already heard the audio recording and told a coworker about it. The tale was getting out, and social media was ready to go. Crazy. As the local MC presented Jasmine, you could feel the tension in the ballroom. Some people clapped with enthusiasm, while others did so half-heartedly. There was no disputing that the environment was tense. Jasmine went onto the stage like she owned the spotlight. The lights hit her orange outfit just perfectly, making it bright without being too loud, and strong without being too loud. She didn't seem to be shaken up. She seemed ready. When the microphone turned on, she didn't look at her notes. Instead, she looked around the room. And then she smiled just enough for everyone to know she was watching. Before she even started talking about policy, Jasmine remarked, "Before we talk policy, I just want to say this." The room got quiet. Phones stopped ringing. Eyes glued to her, waiting for her to say something else. And when they did, their voices would carry beyond the boundaries of the ballroom. What she said next would make a lot more than just the ballroom quiet. Social media was like a string of pyrotechnics. A junior producer from a local Fox station had been broadcasting the event to his private Instagram when Jasmine said, "When you've never had to fight for anything." The tweet went viral in less than 20 minutes, and the internet was buzzing with the repercussions. Jasmine, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat in the ballroom. She kept talking, attentive, calm, and delivering her objective evenly. She talked about how inflation was hurting small businesses, how rural Texas had no health care, and how broadband gaps had made classrooms hard to work in. She never brought up what Melania said again, not even a look. But what about the crowd? They were still sitting there with the heaviness of her words. A guy at the third table leaned over to his wife and whispered, "Did she really just say that to Melania?" His wife just shrugged. And just like that, the political show had changed completely. Jasmine Crockett's answer to Melania Trump's veiled jab wasn't just a snappy rebuttal. It was a moment that would change the political landscape. When Jasmine spoke, her words didn't just float in the air. They hit hard all around the country, not just in the ballroom. Melania stayed quiet in the front of the room. She didn't smile or frown. She just had the same unreadable look on her face that you get when you don't want to give anyone the satisfaction of watching you respond. But something had shifted in her eyes. She wasn't used to being talked to bluntly, especially not like that. Two reporters had left their seats outside the ballroom to call in early stories, and the clip was immediately making the rounds in newsrooms and group conversations all over the country. When Jasmine was done with her message, which called for actual service instead than showmanship, reporters were scrambling for a spot near the exit. But Jasmine didn't stop to talk. She stepped off the stage, through the curtain, and right into Alicia's arms. Alicia smiled and gave her a new bottle of water. "They're going to talk about this all year," she remarked. Jasmine smiled softly. "Let them. I meant every word." At the same time, cable networks were already showing the clip. MSNBC showed it right before a commercial break, with a carry-on that said, "Congresswoman Crockett delivers quiet storm at Dallas fundraiser." CNN showed a complete program within an hour, depicting it as a fight between two women with very different forms of authority. Even online forums, which usually don't talk about political speeches, were getting involved. Someone on Reddit said, "That line was cleaner than anything I've heard in a debate in 5 years." On TikTok, someone edited the soundbite over slow-motion clips of Jasmine walking on stage, with music from Kendrick Lamar to Nina Simone. It wasn't simply a moment, it was a sign. Travis LeClaire, a campaign strategist for a well-known Senate candidate, stood in front of a whiteboard full of polling figures in a hotel room in downtown Dallas. When his aide showed him the clip, he stopped mid-sentence. He watched it again and then said, "She just changed the subject." Celeste Boyd, a retired school teacher, was washing dishes when her niece gave her the video. Celeste stopped what she was doing, turned it up all the way, and called 3 buddies. "I don't know who that girl is," she added, "but she just said what I've been feeling for 20 years. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Conservative commentators swiftly got involved, saying that Jasmine was rude, divisive, and overly dramatic. Some anchors even tried to make Melania's original comment sound less harsh by saying it was a general comment about how politics is done today. But the original audio was clear, and the context didn't help it at all. Still, Jasmine didn't say anything. She didn't tweet. She didn't share the clip again or take a victory lap. Her silence spoke a lot. It wasn't a show, it was on purpose. But silence doesn't stop people from guessing, it makes them guess more. The scene had changed a lot by morning. It was no longer just a 7-second conversation. It wasn't only political news that was talking about the aftermath anymore. It was also morning shows, radio personalities, group chats, and Facebook ants who were posting the video with captions like, "Say it again louder." Jasmine Crockett was the most talked about person on Twitter in the US at 6 a.m. and throughout the world at 8:15 a.m. The original 7-second soundbite had now been used in hundreds of edits, memes, and videos. People didn't simply speak about the comeback, they also spoke about how she said it. Calm, steady, not smug, just on time. While drinking coffee on Good Morning Arizona, a group of local anchors played the tape again, clearly trying not to smile. Lorraine Vickers, a veteran TV reporter, ultimately remarked she knew exactly what she was doing, and it wasn't just about Melania. It was about the system that lets people like Melania say things like that and never get checked. Her co-host said, and Jasmine didn't yell. She didn't use names. She didn't make it look bad. She just said what she thought. In Oklahoma, on the other hand, conservative radio took a different tactic. Darryl Prescott, the host, started his morning show by saying that the incident was an unnecessary public jab at the First Lady. He then said that Jasmine had set it all up. He thought that Jasmine wanted Melania to say something harsh so that she could look like a hero. That idea didn't work. It was evident that Jasmine hadn't even flinched when she walked in as more footage came out from other angles. She didn't say anything until she was at the microphone. There was no setup, it was just a reaction. And it made it hit harder. A group of black women sat at their customary table by the window in a coffee shop in Tulsa. Lorraine Wiggins, a retired nurse, was already raving about the clip when her friend Denise came in. "Girl," Lorraine replied, "she said it clean." Denise chuckled and tapped the screen of her phone. Lorraine said she didn't even raise her voice. She didn't have to. 3 firefighters in Plano watched the video on someone's phone between calls. One of them shrugged and said, "I don't care who you vote for, man. That was cold. You can't even be furious about that." Aides for many members of Congress in Washington, D.C. were sending emails to their bosses with updates on the situation. Some Democrats saw a chance to get their message out, while others discreetly prepared themselves, not wanting to be caught up in a press cycle that had nothing to do with them. While this was going on, Melania's press staff was already on their 4th draft of a statement, but the First Lady hadn't signed off on any of them yet. She was sitting by the window with her arms folded and scrolling through her phone in solitude. Someone who was an advisor came up. "We may either disregard it or look at it in a different way." "I suggest the latter," Melania said without looking up. "I never had to fight," she whispered softly. Then she stopped. "But she doesn't know anything about my life." The counselor thought for a moment. "You want to talk about it?" Melania finally turned away from the screen. "Not yet." The staff was amazed by how calm she was. Some people thought she would post something gentle but solid, like a quote about grace or a hint to being misunderstood. Instead, she kept off of social media. And that alone led to fresh guesses. People on the news asked a lot of questions. Was the First Lady upset? Did Jasmine hit a nerve? Why didn't Melania say anything back? The late-night shows even got in on the talk. One comedian said when Jasmine Crockett came into the chat, Melania Trump suddenly remembered how to log off. The group laughed as the clip played again behind them. Some people believed Jasmine had gone too far, while others said she hadn't gone far enough. But the people who were most honest about how they felt were the ones who saw the event as real, not theatrical. During an NPR call-in interview that afternoon, one black professor at Southern Methodist University said it best. This wasn't about fashion. It wasn't even about politics. It was about being close to the fight. And when someone who's had to climb says anything to someone who's always been carried, it hits differently. While the public talked about tone, motive, and respectability, the truth was very straightforward. Neither woman had raised her voice while they were talking. And now the whole country was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see what would happen next. The fundraising dinner made news that weekend, not because of its purpose or the $1 million donations it received, but because of one moment, one sentence, and one mute reaction. The effects were beginning to go beyond the ballroom. A conservative think group from Fort Worth said on Saturday morning that Jasmine's statements were deeply disrespectful to the office of the First Lady. It wasn't forceful, but it was enough to show that party lines were getting tighter. Later that day, a Texas senator was on the local news and said that Crockett should apologize for making personal attacks and remember that she was there to represent the people, not get more followers on social media. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't hold another news conference, do any interviews, or answer her phone. She turned down all media demands throughout the weekend. Instead, she went back to her district and went to a community clinic in Grand Prairie. The cameras came nonetheless. A reporter tried to interview Jasmine about the event, but she turned to her, smiled pleasantly, and answered, "I already spoke." That phrase also made it into the news. Melania's camp still hadn't said anything public, though. Days went by, and political commentators started to wonder if there would be one. Some people close to Melania quietly said that she was above petty conflicts, but those quotes still felt shallow. There was certainly something going on behind the stillness. On Monday morning, the Dallas Tribune published a long, analytical piece called Elegance, Grit, and the Politics of Appearance. It looked at how women in politics have been judged for how they dress or how they are treated for doing so over the years. The story quoted both Melania's first comment and Jasmine's response next to each other in the center. This was the first time that both quotes had been published in full in a national magazine. The effect happened right away. Editorial boards joined in. Professors wrote opinion pieces. High school debate teams cited the conversation as an example. At a women's leadership gathering in Philadelphia, there was even a whole panel about respectability politics and the cost of being calm. Back at the White House, aides talked about whether Melania should talk about the phrase at her next public event. But she said no. No written statement. No news conference. She went to Reno for a charity event where she smiled for pictures with kids and didn't say anything about Dallas. But silence may say a lot, especially if you're used to being the one who starts the conversation. The tension continued in the corridors of Congress. A senior GOP staffer heard someone in the cafeteria joke. Jasmine scared half the office into checking their emails twice. The joke got laughs, but a colleague quickly looked over and said, "Well, she's not wrong." Jasmine got messages from both sides of the aisle. Some were simple, like, "Well done," but others were more difficult, like ladies who had never spoken out when they were talked down to quietly thanking him, or guys who knew that the world had shifted a little. That night, Alicia's assistant read one of the messages out loud in the office late in the day. It came from a lawmaker who had been in office for decades without ever going viral. The message said, "You didn't hurt anyone's feelings. You told them we're not furniture." Jasmine read it twice and then put it away. But not everyone was happy. On the same day, a PAC in southern Florida ran an ad that made Jasmine look angry, ungrateful, and a dangerous face of the Democratic Party today. The video was old film from town halls that had been manipulated to make it look like she was fighting. The commercial ran in some swing counties, and many groups swiftly attacked it for its racist implications. Still, the goal was clear: stop her before the moment got out of hand. The issue was that it had already happened. A poll issued by a nonpartisan group later that week revealed that 64% of people who answered had seen or heard about the event at the gala. Most of them indicated they thought Jasmine's answer was fair, measured, and honest. The number was significantly greater among younger voters. People were still talking, but not only about the moment. They were chatting in barbershops, on podcasts, in classrooms, and at kitchen tables. They were discussing about what happened before it and what it showed about the difference between presence and power. By the end of the week, it was no longer about Melania and Jasmine. It had become something else, something visceral, difficult, and very relatable to many Americans who don't see themselves on stage very often. A women's club was meeting in the basement of a church on the south side of Fort Worth on Thursday nights as usual. It wasn't meant to be political. It was largely retired teachers, single parents, and working professionals getting together to talk about life, family, and the news. But that night, the first thing someone said after the prayer was, "Did you all hear what Jasmine said to the First Lady?" Brianna, a younger woman, nodded slowly. It wasn't even rude, it was just true. That's when Miss Thelma, an elder member of the group, crossed her arms and added, "Because truth hits different when it's said." Out loud by someone who's not supposed to say it. The women in the room hummed in agreement. This wasn't about being rude, it was about rank. About who may say what they want, who has to dress like they're trying to fit in, who gets called brave, and who gets called angry. That week, a civics class at a high school in Flagstaff, Arizona, stopped what they were doing to talk about the tragedy. Mr. Warren, their teacher, scribbled 2 statements on the whiteboard, one from Melania and one from Jasmine. Then he asked, "What do you notice?" One student raised her hand. "It's like they're talking about the same thing, but in different languages," said one student. Another student said, "Melania is talking to someone." "Jasmine's talking for people," said the room. News segments began to feature voices that typically lacked exposure, including historians, sociologists, fashion authorities, and even etiquette instructors. One professor from Louisiana State said on the broadcast, "This isn't just a political moment. It's about how we judge trustworthiness. In Melania's world, quiet and looks are power. Jasmine is from a place where silence means death. People weren't just listening. They were thinking about what they heard. Guys also started to speak up. A father told his teenage son what he liked about Jasmine's answer at a barbershop in Albuquerque. She didn't get loud or backpedal. She said it clearly, as if she were talking to every girl who had ever been put down for wearing the incorrect thing. The son nodded silently. Yeah, that's leadership. On college campuses, students started using the interaction as a way to talk about representation, how we act in rooms, who gets to wear what, and what it all means. A lecturer at Xavier University gave her students an essay to write called "What is Presidential?" She wanted them to think about who defines professionalism, who it leaves out, and whether dressing for the country meant getting rid of culture or raising it. During a book signing in Dallas, Laura Bush, a former First Lady, was asked about the occurrence, which was unexpected. She didn't take a side, but she replied softly, "I think every woman in politics eventually gets judged for something that has nothing to do with her record." It wasn't a condemnation or a defense. It was a little sign that we might require women in public life to do things differently and wear the correct shoes while doing them. But even though people were having deep conversations, the pushback was still there. Some news outlets kept showing clips that sought to make Jasmine look aggressive, too sure of herself, or even rude. They looked at old pictures, analyzed her tone, and asked what she meant. She didn't say anything. Instead, she shared a picture of her district office reopening after some minor repairs, with the message "Back to work." Simple. Straightforward. Another statement without saying anything. Jasmine leaned on the one thing she knew would always work: being consistent. She understood that if she allowed the cacophony control her, they would write her into the story they wanted. But if she stayed calm and concentrated on the work, they would have to deal with her on her own terms. Because what Jasmine said wasn't simply a line, it was a line in the sand. But lines only mean something when people pay attention to where they are. And everyone in the country was watching this one. It was a calm Tuesday afternoon when Jasmine's phone rang with a message she didn't expect. Unknown number. "Hi, Congresswoman. This is Lena Fairburn. If you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you privately." Jasmine stopped. Lena Fairburn was not just any person. She was a retired political strategist who had worked with 3 presidents and quietly taught a whole generation of black women how to go into politics. She didn't often show out in public, never talked about current affairs, and was known for being hard to get in touch with. A few seconds later, Jasmine wrote back, "Thanks for getting in touch. I have time after 4. Can call." At 4:02, Jasmine sat in her car outside a grocery shop with the motor running and the AC humming. She dialed the number, not sure what would happen. Lena's voice was low and clean, yet it still had an authoritative tone when she said, "Congresswoman." "Miss Fairburn," Jasmine said right away, showing respect. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you." "I tend to stay quiet," Lena said, "but sometimes silence doesn't work." Jasmine waited, not sure if she was going to get in trouble or be praised. "I saw the footage," Lena went on. "I saw how you handled it. You kept your tone, stood your ground, and didn't turn it into theater. That's rare. That's seasoned." Jasmine exhaled slowly but didn't say anything. But Lena kept going. "I wanted to tell you something I've never said in public. 34 years ago, I was in a room in Little Rock. A man said to me, 'You'll never be respected in Washington if you will wear your hair like that.' I straightened it for the next 2 years, not because I believed him, but because I needed the votes." "So you saw yourself in what happened," Jasmine said softly. "I saw what I used to wish I had done. And I'm telling you this, what you said, that wasn't for cameras. That was for every woman who's been asked to shrink." "You don't need my approval," Lena finally added, "but you've got my respect." Jasmine swallowed a small lump in her throat. "That means a lot, really." "You don't owe people softness when they judge you," Lena said, "but always speak like someone is listening, someone who needs the courage to speak next." That line settled into Jasmine's bones. They talked for 10 more minutes about policy, stamina, and the weight of being visible in places where people don't expect you to be unshaken. When the call ended, Jasmine didn't move for a while. She watched people come and go from the store, carts rolling, toddlers crying, keys jingling, real life, the kind of thing that doesn't care about cable news. Later that night, she told Alicia about the conversation. Alicia nodded slowly and said, "You ever think about how long it took to get from straightening your hair to speak your truth?" Jasmine smiled and said, "Long enough to make it count." And it was counting. More women were reaching out to share stories of the quiet humiliations they had lived through and swallowed. A school principal in San Antonio, a city councilwoman in Tulsa, and a mom who had been told her head wrap was inappropriate for a parent-teacher meeting. They weren't just praising Jasmine, they were processing. And in doing so, they were letting go of something they had carried for too long. This wasn't about a viral moment anymore. It had become something heavier, something rooted. But rooted things grow, and what had begun as a single reply was now stretching its limbs across dinner tables, boardrooms, and quiet phone calls like this one. 2 weeks later, the noise had died down, but the impact hadn't. The media had moved on to a new controversy, another press leak, another tweet. But in quieter corners of the country, Jasmine Crockett's response still lingered, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it had been rooted in something that a lot of people couldn't shake. In Baltimore, a college student named Carmen used Jasmine's quote as the opening line of her commencement speech. "When you've never had to fight for anything, it's easy to think style is louder than substance." She credited it with giving her the courage to wear the traditional Kent cloth her grandmother sent from Ghana, even after her department chair had hinted it might distract from the cap and gown. In El Paso, a local radio host opened his Monday segment with a monologue about perception. "For years, we've told women, especially black women, that they had to look a certain way to be heard. But maybe it's time we listen first and judge later." The clip of Jasmine's speech, just 42 seconds long, was now used in training seminars about bias in the workplace. Not because it offered a solution, but because it revealed the problem so clearly. And Jasmine? She kept her focus where it had always been, her district. At a town hall in Cedar Park, she stood in front of folding chairs and paper fans, fielding questions about transportation, Medicare, and school lunch programs. She answered each one the same way she always did, clearly, directly, and without gloss. When someone in the back brought up the gala, she just smiled and said, "Let's stay on topic," The folks here showed up for policy, not pageantry. People clapped, not because she was throwing shade, but because she was working. Later that day, as she walked to her car with Alicia, she stopped before unlocking the door. "You know what still gets me?" she said. "I didn't say anything revolutionary. I just didn't pretend." Alicia replied, "That's what made it hit harder. You weren't trying to win something, you were just telling the truth out loud." And in a political world built on talking points and carefully manicured phrases, that mattered more than most people realized. Jasmine's answer didn't end the debate, it started one. It made a lot of people think about their own ideas about respect, identity, and what leadership looks like, not just in press rooms, but also in classrooms, hospitals, banks, and PTA meetings, where people still judge you based on how you look before you even say a word. She peeled something back, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Even Melania's camp, which had never been public, began to change its tone. At her next public appearance, the First Lady wore a bright blue dress designed by a Ukrainian-American woman whose work focused on blending individuality with traditional form. It was a quiet gesture, maybe a small acknowledgement that image isn't just about how you look, it's about what you represent. A week later, a Republican senator was on a Sunday show and talked about how women in power need to have more honest conversations. He didn't name Jasmine or Melania, but everyone got the hint. At the same time, Jasmine's fans started calling the gala moment the pause, not because of the line itself, but because of what happened after, that full-body silence in the room, the kind of silence that only follows truth. Political moments come and go, they trend, they fade, but truth, that sticks around. And what Jasmine said that night, measured, quick, composed, wasn't just a comeback. It was a mirror, one that showed the difference between being seen and being understood. In the months that followed, her quote appeared on t-shirts, posters, and even as the title of a podcast. But Jasmine didn't cash in on it. She didn't build a brand. She kept working, kept showing up, and kept doing what she'd always done, serving. The lesson wasn't about who she put in their place. It was about keeping grounded in your own. And long after the cameras left, that's what people remembered. Not the ruckus, but the calm that came after. Something true. It's easy to forget that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks in one sentence, measured, clear, and perfectly timed. Jasmine Crockett reminded the country of that truth without needing to dress it up or explain it afterward. She didn't beg to be understood. She didn't follow up with a string of tweets or a PR tour. She let the moment breathe. She trusted people would feel the difference between flash and foundation, and they did. A lot of people looked in the mirror and started asking questions they had never thought of before. Who gets to be taken seriously before they speak? Why do we associate grace with silence? Why is confidence sometimes mistaken for arrogance, especially in women who don't shrink in certain rooms? Those questions didn't start with Jasmine's one-liner, but they got louder because of it. In an era when everyone is trying to go viral, Jasmine didn't aim for attention. She aimed for truth. And somehow, that reached farther than any calculated performance ever could. She wasn't perfect or ready for TV, but she was there. And in that presence, people saw someone who didn't look like a leader, but who felt like a leader when they lived it. When you've never had to fight for anything, it's easy to think style is louder than substance. That line stuck with me because it wasn't meant to get applause. It was based on years of being expected to have credentials, patience, and elegance just to get a baseline of respect. That shouldn't be necessary in a better world. But in this one, words like Jasmine's plant seeds. These seeds develop into conversations, which grow into understanding, which changes how we perceive each other over time. Change doesn't actually start with the loudest voice in the room. It starts with a voice that cuts through the cacophony without even attempting to compete. The lesson? Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Or better yet, say it so calmly that the room has to think about how to respond. And don't confuse silence with peace. Sometimes silence is discomfort trying to hide, but other times silence is respect for a truth that landed clean. You don't need a title, the perfect accent, the right clothes, or the appropriate room to be respected. You simply need to stand on something that can't be shaken. That's what Jasmine did, and that's why people listened. So, if you're watching this, wherever you are and whomever you are, remember, you don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be loved to be right. You don't have to be famous to change the mood around you. But you do have to speak. Silence can be a weapon in the wrong hands, but in the right hands, it can be a mic drop. If this tale made you feel something, even a little, please subscribe. Not because of the drama, but because of the truth. We tell genuine stories about real people who remind us of what matters. And trust me, there's more where that came from.